we will begin the session. Just give another, let's say, a minute or two for the attendees to join in. While we are waiting for the attendees to join in, as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Teams chat. I'll do my best to answer the questions during the session or towards the end of the session. If not, I'll share my email address and we can have a conversation offline. The recording and the slides will be shared after the session so that you can rewatch it and share it with your colleagues who couldn't attend today's session. So we're just giving another minute before we start off with the session. Dorothy, if you can confirm my voice is loud and clear.
Yep, I can hear you well.
Okay, thank you. Also, the session is being recorded, so if you do not wish to be recorded during the session while you ask questions, you can always watch the recording. So just a reminder that the session is being recorded. Okay, so I think we have most of the people in the session now, so let's get started. So thank you again for taking our time and joining in today's session. Today's session is on Azure Virtual Desktop Application App as a Service or app streaming. To get started, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Roshan. I've been working with Ingram for about 5 years now. I've been working on Azure for the last 8 to 10 years. My background, I've been always a Microsoft guy. Started with SharePoint, then worked on SQL, and then Microsoft 365, and now have been working on Azure. I'm based in Melbourne, and in my current role as solution architect, I help partners design, develop, and deliver solutions on Microsoft Azure. I work very closely with the M365 team as well to collaborate and build solutions which combine the capabilities of M365 and Microsoft Azure. So during the course of today's session, if you have any questions, my email address is my first name dot last name at ingrammicro.com. Feel free to drop me an email and I'll be more than happy to get on a call and hopefully help you out with your customer queries. Today's session, we'll be looking at a very interesting feature introduced by Microsoft, which is part of Azure Virtual Desktop, known as application streaming. Now it has multiple names. To keep it simpler, we'll call it as application streaming. In the upcoming slides, you'll see another word known as App Attach. It's the same concept. So for people who are new to the virtual desktop world, we'll have a quick introduction about why Azure Virtual Desktop, what is Azure Virtual Desktop, how is it changing the landscape of virtual desktop infrastructure, what are some of its features and functionality, and then we'll go deeper into one of its features, which is remote app streaming. We'll look at how it's configured, why is it required, and then we'll also look at the licensing requirement to configure this. And towards the end, I'll show you a demonstration of how, once configured, it'll work for your customers or even for your own internal employees. Again, just to emphasize, if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to use the Teams chat. The session is being recorded. The slides and the recordings will be shared with you after the session. So as we all know, we have been through the 2 years of pandemic. Now that countries have started opening, you'll still see a lot of companies offering hybrid work where you have people coming to the office for a few days, and for the rest of the week they are working from home. So you still need to have that flexible model of working, and companies are now required to provide that secure remote work infrastructure, right? You also have organizations encouraging people to use their own devices to access corporate um, data and applications. So these are some of the triggers that we have seen customers adopting virtual desktop concept, right? And now that in 21st century everybody is talking about cloud, Microsoft came out with Azure Virtual Desktop about 2 years ago, and has taken the virtual desktop concept by storm. Everybody is now looking at uh, investing in virtual desktop. If you even look at Gartner report about uh, the investments that companies are making in the next couple of years, one of the highest investment is on desktop as a service, right? Where end users do not really want to worry about where the infrastructure is running, which platform is it running, till the time they're able to access either a desktop or the application that they need to access to do their day-to-day job. So that is where Azure Virtual Desktop comes into place. So a quick introduction about Azure Virtual Desktop. It is a desktop as a service offering from Microsoft. So if you have been in the Windows VDI world long enough, you would know Microsoft had a product called Remote Desktop Server or Remote Desktop Services. Azure Virtual Desktop is an enhanced version or a more refined version of Remote Desktop Server. One of the major differences between RDS and Azure Virtual Desktop is RDS primarily works on a Windows Server Windows Server based environment. What do I mean by that is when you configure RDS and when a user logs in to a desktop, he logs into a Windows Server machine. In Azure Virtual Desktop, you will be logging into a Windows 10 and now Windows 11 machine as well. That's right. So Windows 11 is now generally available on Azure Virtual Desktop. So in many ways, you can actually use Azure Virtual Desktop to try and test Windows 11 to see if your applications are compatible, and also provide, I would say, some sort of user training to adopt to the new user interface. So going back to Azure Virtual Desktop, it allows users to log into a Windows 10 platform. So the amount of learning that an end user has to do in order to open up a desktop, look at options, launch applications on a Windows 10 is very, very minimal because they've been already using it. Azure Virtual Desktop also has a lot of enhancements around management of user profile. Now, traditionally, when we talk about, again, remote desktop, you would know that when you configure user profile disks, it typically goes ahead and sits in the C drive of your terminal server, right? So it keeps expanding, which means you always have to monitor, have enough storage to accommodate all your users. And it's very cumbersome, right? When it comes to capacity expansion, backup and disaster recovery, it's a very long and cumbersome process. With Azure Virtual Desktop, using the concept of FSLogix, you can now store the user profile data outside your terminal server in a shared location. And whenever the user logs in, his specific user profile disk or user profile container, which is now known as, gets attached to the terminal server of the session host that he logs into. So all this is happening in the background. But for you as an MSP or you as an IT administrator, you would need to know that now the user profile data can be stored outside the session host, which gives you a more cleaner environment, a more manageable environment. So your session hosts are now independent of your user profile. So you can just back up your user profile. So even if your session host crashes or gets corrupted, your user profiles are secure. All you need to do is just fire up another VM, point it to the session user profile wherever they're stored, and your users are back using it. Azure Virtual Desktop also gives auto scaling. Now, there have been a lot of enhancements, and one of the very recent features, which I'll show you during the demonstration, is now auto scaling functionality is embedded within the virtual desktop portal or the virtual desktop console. Uh, Earlier, you had to use Logic Apps, you had to use Azure Functions to configure it, but now Microsoft has made it very, very simple and easy to configure auto scaling. And auto scaling is one of the sought after features where customers always want to use their resources in the most optimized manner. So they will have fewer servers running at the beginning of the day during the initial logon. They'll have multiple servers, and then during the course of the day, again, the server starts reducing, the server count starts reducing as the number of users log off. So this intelligent scaling is available within Azure Virtual Desktop for no additional cost. It's very tightly integrated with M365, especially around security, right? In M365, you can configure conditional access, you can configure multi-factor authentication, you can configure Intune, right? Endpoint manager. All of those are integrated with Azure Virtual Desktop. You can create both pooled and personal desktop. What do I mean by pooled? Pooled means you can have one big fact server and multiple users logging into it, like a traditional remote desktop, right? Where you have, let's say, a 8-core 32 GB machine with about 3-4 users logging into it, right? Those are known as pooled desktop. Personal desktop is a dedicated machine for a dedicated user. Let's say for security reasons, you want the CFO to access only one machine when he does a remote desktop or when he uses VDI. You can even provide that. You can have a combination of pooled and personal within an infrastructure or within a deployment. Uh, in order to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop, it is very simple and easy. It is, I would say, everything is UI driven. There's very less PowerShell driven deployment. So it makes it very simple and easy for smaller MSPs, larger MSPs to configure it for their customers. Now, some of the latest features. Now, this is talking about the features that were introduced, I would say, from the last 6 months. When Azure Virtual Desktop was brought in, there were 2 types of authentication source that was supported. You could have Azure Virtual Desktop work with a traditional Active Directory. When I say traditional Active Directory, a Windows Server machine with Active Directory role running on it, or you could use Azure AD domain services. Right? These are the 2 broadly supported authentication source for Azure Virtual Desktop. Now remember, Azure Virtual Desktop can only run in a domain joined infrastructure. That's a requirement. But now, in the last 6 months, Microsoft has made changes, and just having Azure AD will allow you to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. So think of a scenario where you have your M365 customers, right? All your M365 customers are using Azure AD because their username, their groups is all managed in Azure AD, right? So you already have the infrastructure ready into which you can deploy Azure Virtual Desktop, right? So you don't need to have a directory sync configured. You don't need to enable Azure AD domain services now for you to make your environment ready to work with Azure Virtual Desktop. Just Azure AD is now sufficient. Screen capture protection. This is one of the other feature a lot of companies asked, where once you configure this, if I use any screen capture tool, right from Teams screen sharing to Zoom to even snipping tool, the Azure Virtual Desktop will be grayed out. So you cannot use a screen capture tool to go ahead and capture whatever is being shown in a virtual machine or in an application from Azure Virtual Desktop. So this is a new security feature which Microsoft has introduced. IDP short path. This is for customers who have site-to-site VPN with Azure. A lot of companies, I would say most of the companies that we work with typically have a hybrid setup where they have some servers running on-prem, some servers running in cloud, and the typical connectivity between these two environments is a VPN gateway. Now, if you have customers in this scenario and are looking to either move their on-prem, let's say Citrix infrastructure to Azure, then RDP short path will be a very good feature to implement because this reduces the time to reach the session host from the on-prem client. So this improves latency. Let me put it that way. Typically, if it takes, let's say, 20 milliseconds, with RDP short path, it'll probably reduce down to 5 milliseconds. Right? So it's a direct connection from your client to the host instead of traversing via the gateway, the session broker, and then the terminal server. RDP short path will give you a direct connection to the session host. Integration with Azure Image Builder. Now, this is a feature which allows you to create golden images, custom images, and deploy it across your servers in a much more automated format. But having said that, in today's session, you will see that using the concept of remote app delivery or using the concept of app attach, you don't need to create golden images anymore, right? So that is something that we'll be covering in greater detail today. The other enhancement Microsoft has brought in is Azure Advisor. So Azure Advisor is a built-in advisor tool within Azure. It's actually a free tool which scans your Azure infrastructure and gives you advice with respect to pricing, with respect to performance, with respect to disaster recovery. And now the same advisor also understands Azure Virtual Desktop or gives you advice on Azure Virtual Desktop. Start on Connect, a wonderful feature where you can pretty much have 0 servers running. And as soon as the first user initiates a connection or tries to connect, the server boots up and makes itself ready for the user to do his job. Right? That is Start on Connect. This is a brand new feature already generally available, and you could combine this with auto scaling. A lot of my customers have employees working in Australia, in Philippines, in Malaysia. So there are multiple time zones that they work in, but there's always a certain time. I mean, there's always time, especially during weekends or Monday morning, where you don't typically need to have servers running, right? So Start on Connect allows you to basically have 0 servers running or no servers running. And as soon as a user tries to connect, the first server boots up, allows the user to connect. And as the more and more users start logging in, once the server 1 has reached the capacity, the second server will start, third server would start. And as users log off, the third server will shut down, the second server will shut down. So you can use Start on Connect with auto scaling to get the best scalability and the most cost optimized infrastructure. The last but not the least is application delivery using App Attach. Right? Now, Microsoft has introduced this concept of MSIX. MSIX, think of it as a modern way of packaging your Windows application. We always had MSI packages. MSIX is let's say the version 2 or the enhanced version of packaging your applications. Now with MSIX, you could potentially host any Windows application, 32-bit, 64-bit applications on Azure and stream that application to your customers. Now that customers can be your own internal employees or it can be external employees as well or the external users as well. So in today's session, we will deep dive into this particular concept, application delivery using App Attach. So traditional image packaging, right? How would it work? Everything is very tightly integrated or tightly connected, right? Your operating system has your user profile, your operating system also has your applications. And all this put together is what is delivered to your end user, right? When end user logs in, He is logging into an image which has all the applications already installed, and his user profile typically is also stored on the same box. Now with FSLogix, you are at a halfway point where okay, you're able to separate your user profile. So now your user profile is no more dependent on the terminal server itself, right? It is now stored separately on either a separate virtual machine or some kind of a network storage, right? But what about the apps, right? The apps are still part of your operating system, right? So let's say if you have a customer who has employees in finance department where they need their own apps. You have another department for, let's say, designers where they need their own CAD applications. You have another department, marketing team, where they need their own applications. So you'll end up creating multiple golden images. And every time there's an update of the operating system or the application, you'll have to go through the process of updating the operating system, updating the applications, and then redeploying them again onto those specific users, right? So it's not easy. It's not streamlined, and the process that you have to go through, especially in today's world where applications keep releasing newer hot fixes and patches so that they're as secure as possible, and are not being compromised by the latest ransomware. So the amount of time the IT team invests in keeping the applications updated is too much. So that is where Microsoft has introduced this option of application streaming. So what happens? So these are the three options, right? Multiple images by role, which we just discussed. Second option is traditional application layering. So you do not have any applications installed on the operating system. You store it outside the operating system in a separate, let's say, product or a separate platform where all your applications are being managed and monitored. Or the third option is application streaming, where the applications are only cached onto your operating system only when required by the user. And when the user closes the application data is removed from the operating system. So now your operating system is independent of your user profile and is also independent of your applications, right? So that is where we look at MSIX App Attach. So MSIX App Attach is a native format which is a modern way of packaging, right? So what do I mean by modern way of packaging? You can still use your existing applications, any applications that you have. In the demo, you'll see I have Notepad, I have Edge, I have Chrome. These are the applications which I have packaged as part of the demo. And all these applications work. I have customers who have packaged softwares such as Best Practice, uh, uh, there's another software called Practice Medical Director. Sorry, not Practice Director, Medical Director. These are some of the hospitality, clinical softwares. There are softwares such as Sage, which has been uh, packaged using MSIX. And I'll show you the process. It is very, very simple, right? Once you have packaged your application as MSIX, you can go ahead, mount it on a VHD, publish it to Azure, and then whenever user initiates or requests that particular application, the VHD of that application gets attached. User does his work. As soon as he closes the application, the VHD is detached, right? So it becomes very seamless for an end user. He still sees that the application is part of the operating system, but in the back end, it is completely independent. As shown in the image here, if you look at the engineer, his virtual machine is independent of his user profile, which is again independent of his application. right? The differences in terms of format, traditional applications come with their own proprietary installation format or the file format. MSIX makes all application formats as unified, right? With traditional application, you have to repackage every single time your vendor releases an update. In MSIX, as of today, you still have to go through the same process, right? With respect to infrastructure, all you require is storage, right? You don't need any additional servers to do app packaging or to publish or to store. All you require is a storage account in Azure. User experience, applications are delivered the same way as if the applications are actually installed on the operating system. So for the end customer himself or the end user himself, there is no difference between how the application is launched or how he uses the application. But in the back end, the application is not actually physically sitting on that particular machine. Now, how can MSP use this concept to stream applications to the customers? Now, this is till now we spoke about the concept, but now we look at how you can use this into a business idea, right? Now, let me give you an example. Let's say if you're an MSP, you have 10 different customers. Each of them are, let's say, into different industry, but most of them use one particular accounting software. Let's say they use, for instance, let's say MyOb, for instance, right? For example. Now, instead of each user implementing a VDI infrastructure for them to allow for them to have their end users access MyOb, what you could do as an MSP is you can install Azure Virtual Desktop in a subscription, or you can configure Azure Virtual Desktop in a subscription. You can install MyOb and you can stream MyOb application to all your users. So you are basically converting an application into software as a service, sort of a software as a service to your customer. The reason I say it is sort of a software as a service is because for your end customer, all they do is either they launch a client and the application is already there. They double click on the application and they're inside the applications and they do whatever work they have to do in the application. Or they can even access the application on a browser, right? They don't have to worry where the application is running, what platform is it running on, how much resources is allocated, none of these things, right? All they do is click on the application icon and they do the work. Very similar to how M365 Office 365 works, right? So when you log into portal.office.com, you have Exchange. You click on Exchange or you click on Outlook and your Outlook mailbox is ready. You don't have to worry where the Exchange server is running, how many core RAM is assigned to it, right? That is how application streaming can enable an MSP to now start hosting applications on behalf of their customers on Azure and stream it. And you can depend on Azure infrastructure for its SLA, right? So Microsoft gives you a 99.99 SLA. So you could potentially use that SLA as your own SLA and deliver services to your customers, right? So to make it a little more simpler, this is a very vague interpretation. So if you have a customer and let's say he's using Azure Virtual Desktop for himself, this is how typically the implementation would work, right? So he'll have a domain controller, for instance. He'll have a couple of session hosts, a database server, which is the backend for the application, and the user profile is stored on a separate location or on a shared location. Now, the same infrastructure, but now for an MSP, right? So you have two end customers using this infrastructure. Now, the main difference, if you see here, the application is now stored within the storage, right? So your applications is separated. It is not on the session host anymore. It is stored separate. So when the user logs in, he gets his own instance of the application. So it's very important that the application should be multi-tenant. What I mean by multi-tenant is the application should have the capability to not show one user's login details to another user. This should be fundamentally part of the application. If it is, then this concept would work, right? Now, if you're if you as an MSP implement this, you have, let's say, a couple of customers, you add another customer, now you need more resources, you can always configure auto scaling within Azure to go ahead and add more servers and provide more and more resources to your customers, right? And as the number of you customers reduce, let's say, for instance, because of pandemic, the number of customers reduced, you can always reduce down the number of servers within Azure as well, right? So now you have a business opportunity where one, you are taking away the risk from the customer to manage and maintain his own infrastructure. You are dictating the pricing for your users. So you, let's say, are publishing, for instance, an accounting software, and you say to the customer, okay, this accounting software will cost you $100 per user per month, and this $100 includes the license cost, the hosting cost, the update cost, everything. All the customer does is pay you $100 per user per month, and he has access to the application, right? Now, there is an additional cost uh, of implementing this on Azure. So one cost is definitely the infrastructure cost. If I take a step back, you still need to pay for the servers that you run on Azure. You still have to pay for the storage that you use in Azure, right? Over and above this, there is a license cost for having application streaming for your end users. Now, this particular pricing is not applicable till January 1st. And from my knowledge, I think this will be extended till March 31st. So till March 31st, and don't quote me on it, you can consider this available till January 1st. If you implement application streaming and publish it to your end customers basically don't have to pay this cost, right? $5, 5.5 or $10. Now $10 is app plus desktop. So you can basically do remote app streaming, remote desktop streaming as well, right? So you're basically providing a desktop to end customers who are not a part of your organization, to end users who are not a part of your organization, right? So you're providing desktop as a service, application as a service, right? For $10 per user per month. And this is the cost over and above the cost of Azure Virtual Desktop infrastructure. So let's say you have two virtual machines, which will probably cost you, let's say, $300. $300 plus $10 per user per month would be the cost of publishing app and desktop. Okay. Now, last but not the least is an Ingram offering. Now, Ingram Micro is very pleased to announce proof of concept funding. So if you have customers who are interested to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop, or if you as an MSP want to implement this application streaming and publish a specific app, like let's say medical director, to all your customers, we can fund the infrastructure cost and help you configure it. Right? This is a very good opportunity where you would not have to invest a lot from your end. All you have to invest is some time and resources. And we will help you implement the concept. You can test it and try it with your customers if it works wonderfully. Or if you have a customer who wants to have a virtual desktop for his own use, we can help implement it that as well. Okay. Now, as part of today's session, we are also running a quiz where we are giving away $100 of GB Hi-Fi voucher. And the question for that is this: which of the following Active Directory option is supported with remote app publishing? So kindly answer the question in the chat, and the first right answer will get a prize, the $100 GB Hi-Fi voucher. Okay, so I see people answering. I'll review the answers, and when I send you out the recording and the slides, I'll also announce the winner for it. Wonderful. So let's look at a quick demonstration. So let me stop sharing my screen. In the meanwhile, I go ahead, open up the remote, the desktop sharing. There is a question as well. In the MSP to multiple customer stream, there is only one DC. So how does the user authentication across multiple tenants? Okay, Eddie, that's a good question. Now, there are multiple ways to handle external users, right? Option one is if your external users already have their own Azure AD, you don't need to use, you don't need to have an Active Directory set up for it, right? Like in how I showed in the diagram. If you can use their own Azure AD and do app streaming. So you're basically working with multiple tenants. You have your own tenant, you have customers using their own tenant, and you're basically publishing, you're streaming the app to their tenant and they're able to use it. So they will authenticate with their own Azure AD. But if you are hosting on behalf of customer who doesn't have Azure at all, right? Or who doesn't, they might be using Office 365, but not Azure. And they don't mind using a login which you provide. Some of my partners, what they've done is they have created a custom domain called, for example, if I give you an example, you can create a domain known as medical.australia.com, right? And every user who wants to use the medical practice software, he will get a user login as user1@medical.australia.com, right? So you are dictating the username that they will use. So in that scenario, having one Active Directory is more than enough because you can create multiple OUs within the Active Directory so that you're able to segregate the users and make sure that you're able to have OU level separation for each of your customers. There's a question from Andre saying, is their data stored with them or with you? I'm assuming you're talking about the app stream. Any data that is that they make changes to is stored on Azure. Right now, if you're hosting it, it's stored with you, right? If they are hosting it, then obviously it is stored with them, right? So when I said they are hosting, they have their own Azure Virtual Desktop. Wonderful. If there are any further questions, please feel free to use the chat and we'll be more than happy to answer the questions. Now, before I get into the demo, there are a couple of sites which I wanted to quickly share with you. This is the announcement where we saw the new pricing for remote app streaming coming into place, right? And like I said, for the promotional period, there's basically no charge till end of this year, right? There's another page which talks very detailedly about the licensing itself. So as you see, there is a per user pricing model which is introduced. This is over and above the cost of the infrastructure, right? So I will be sharing these links with you for you to review. You can go through it, and yeah, if you have any questions, you can always get in touch with me. Also, I quickly wanted to show you a quick diagram about RDP short path. Now, though Azure Virtual Desktop is running in Azure, when you access the applications, when you access the terminal server, you still traverse through the RDS architecture, right? So your connection still goes through the gateway, the session broker, and then the terminal server. But RDP short path, as you see here, gives you direct access to the session host, right? So you don't have to go through the RD gateway, through the remote broker service, and then to the session host. RDP short path from the client straight into the session host, right? That is how the short path works. But for this to work, you need to have a direct line of sight to the session host, which means your on-prem systems should be able to communicate directly to the session host. So you would require some sort of a connectivity, a hybrid network, either an express route or a VPN gateway. Okay. So now going back into the Azure portal. So if I jump on to Azure Virtual Desktop, if you see here, this is the scaling plan. This is the auto scaling functionality which Microsoft has introduced. As you can see, per user access pricing. So all of the Azure Virtual Desktop concepts are now within a single portal, which makes it very, very easy to configure it. If I look at one of the app attach setup which I have, if you look at the MSIX packages, I have a couple of packages. Now these are 32-bit applications. I just wanted to demonstrate that even 32-bit are supported. So these are a couple of games that I have. I can go ahead and add other applications into it as well. So the management of app attach is again within the Azure portal, and these applications itself are installed or are running in a storage account. So this is a storage account, and if I go to the file shares, see, these are the storage VSD files where the applications are being run from or being stored from. Now, let me quickly open up another machine so I can show you the packaging process. So for the packaging itself, all you need is a Windows 10 machine. Now, like I said, you can use any Windows 10 machine to do the packaging. Is the machine up and running? Let me quickly check that. Yep. Okay. So I'm just logging into a machine which I used in order to create the MSIX packages. So I want to quickly show you how the packaging would work. Now, one requirement to do packaging is all packages have to be digitally signed, right? This is a requirement. So when you are implementing it, it is very, very critical and important that you have uh, certificates from a trusted location. In my lab, I've used self-signed certificates as it's a demo environment. Now, the reason for having the certificates for application is because you are basically packaging the application, storing it on Azure, and having users consume it. Right? You do not want applications with ransomware or with any malicious code running within this infrastructure. So Microsoft has made it mandatory for all MSIX packages to be digitally signed, and you will see that right here. So the MSIX package is available as part of the Microsoft Store, and it's a free application. So if you search for MSIX packaging, so you'll find this tool. All you need to do is go ahead, get and install this tool, and this tool is a wizard-based tool which you can use to go ahead and package your application. Now, while that is being downloaded, let me quickly download an application which we can use to package it. Right, so we'll have a quick run through of how you can package the application. Okay, let's say setup, confirm, and let's download, let's say 7-zip, right? This is one application that we will package. So I'll open this MSIX packaging tool, accept, and what I'm doing is I will go ahead and download, let's say a 64-bit. Okay, this is done. Also, like I said, you will require a certificate. So I already have a self-signed certificate. So let me quickly bring that up here. It's in desktop, not in desktop. It should be here, sorry. So this is the self-signed certificate, which I have, right? Now this self-signed certificate also has to be installed on the local machine in the trusted people folder. So if I open up this certificate manager, you will see I have the same certificate in trusted people as well. Okay. So I have the application downloaded. I have the packaging tool available. So I just click on package application. So I'll just disable this Windows search. Next, now this is where I upload that application. So I'll just upload this package. Now this is where the signing preference comes in, right? So you can use device guard. I've used certificate, so I'll browse for the certificate. So this is where I said the certificate is a mandatory step, right? You give it a password. I'll say 7-zip. I'll use the same description everywhere. 1.2.2. I'll use desktop as my installation location. Now, the good part about this packaging is you don't have to be a developer, right? Now, once it starts creating the package, it asks you to install the application. Now, since you are using an application which you're familiar with, I'm sure you would also know how to install it, right? So install it, close it. So the installation is done. Click next, next. It says, are you sure you want to package the application now? It goes ahead and creates a package, right? Do you want to exclude anything? I'll say no and create. So now you see the MSIX App Attach package is ready, right? Now the next step is obviously to go ahead, extract this into a VHD and do a couple of additional activities which I've already taken care of. So if I quickly show you the end result of creating a VHD file would be something like this documents. So you would basically have created VHD files within which you have extracted the MSIX package. And these are the VHD files which you would upload into your Azure files storage. Now, I'm using Azure files because this is the most recommended one. You can even use a file server, a virtual machine acting as a file server, or Azure NetApp files. But Azure files is definitely recommended. Right. Also, make sure that the Azure files is configured to work with Active Directory in my scenario. Now, coming back to the question, which of the following are supported for remote app streaming? Only as of today, only Windows Active Directory is supported. You cannot use Azure AD Domain Services or just Azure AD. Right? You still need to have either a virtual machine acting as an Active Directory or an on-prem Windows server. Right? So that's the right answer. So I've configured all of that. And if I show you the end user experience, now I'll use the client. So what I'll do is I'll subscribe with the URL. I'll log in as a test user. So this is how an end user would interact with an application which is published. Right? So he'll log in. It's taking a little while. Hopefully the demo gods are with me today. Click this, log in. I'm sure Microsoft is making enhancements in the background so that it makes it becomes available with just Azure AD and or use Azure AD Domain Services. But as of today, it is just Windows Active Directory. So I have published both applications and the desktop, right? Let's say if I double click on this bubble shoot game, so it'll go ahead, launch the application. And if you closely observe the application at the bottom, it would have those two brackets, which shows me that this is an application which is running right from my virtual desktop. Okay, so this is basically how the end user experience would be. So this will just take a couple of minutes because the machine was just restarted. Yep, you see here. So this is just an example, right? I'm just using game, but this can be any application, right? It can be any application that you can stream to a user. He doesn't have to worry where the application is running, who is hosting it in terms of platform. All he does is click on the application, log in, and starts using the application to do his work. Okay. So that pretty much concludes the session for today. If you have any questions, now is the time for questions. So let me go ahead, screen, and let me see if there are any questions. Okay. Does each user require a license that supports AVD like 365 Business Premium? Now, if you're talking in terms of remote app streaming, the answer is no. So let's say you're an MSP, you are hosting an application and publishing it to an end customer who would use that application. Does that user require M365 Business Premium? The answer is no, but I'll just double confirm that. Right? The answer is no. Now, the second scenario, you implement Azure Virtual Desktop for a customer, right? Which is just for him, and he uses Virtual Desktop to provide desktop for his own internal users or provide applications for his own internal users. Then yes, all those users will require M365 Business Premium license. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. So I don't see any other questions popping up. So if there are no further questions, then ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. I hope the session was helpful and informative. I hope it gave you an idea of how you become not just be an MSP, but now you can even become an ISV. So you can start hosting applications for your customers and basically convert a client server based application into sort of a software as a service based application, right? This also will encourage, I would definitely encourage you to work with the vendors, right? The company which has developed the product. You can always work with them and go to them and say that, okay, I can host your applications and deliver your applications in this manner. So you can then become an authorized hoster for that application using Azure Virtual Desktop and remote app publishing. So these are some of the ideas, business ideas that you can use with remote app. And yeah, if you have any questions, if you need any technical assistance from Ingram in order to implement it, feel free to get in touch with us. Like I said, we have some funding available which we can use for POC purposes. So feel free to get in touch with us and we'll be more than happy to help you and support you on that. Okay, so that's it from my side, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah, looking forward to delivering another session to you in the near future. Thank you very much and have a great day ahead.